Edward Vaughan had traveled many lonely roads in his years as a traveling businessman. In the late autumn chill of 1989, his battered sedan rolled into the sleepy town where the historic Brookdale Lodge stood, a crumbling yet dignified relic of a bygone era. Even before stepping out of the car, Edward had heard the murmurs. Locals spoke of a drowned girl whose restless spirit haunted the property. He dismissed them as superstitious ramblings, mere folklore to entertain small-town visitors. Yet, nothing in his life had prepared him for the events that would soon shatter his skepticism. The lodge loomed before him as twilight melted into night. Its weathered stone facade and towering, mullioned windows hinted at an era when Brookdale Lodge was a beacon of hospitality and sophistication. Edward parked his car by the narrow gravel drive and approached the front entrance, his briefcase clutched tightly in hand. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. A soft drizzle began to fall, lending an eerie sheen to the worn brick walls. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit by a single chandelier whose crystals reflected fractured rainbows across faded wallpaper. An elderly clerk behind a creaking wooden desk greeted him with a polite nod. "Welcome to Brookdale Lodge, Mr. Vaughan," she said in a voice that trembled with both warmth and worry. "Your room is ready. Please follow the corridor to the east wing." Edward's footsteps echoed down the long hall. Every creak of the floorboard and every whisper of the wind outside set his nerves on edge. He finally arrived at room 217, a modest space with antique furnishings and a large window that overlooked the overgrown gardens. As he unpacked his few belongings, he could not shake the odd feeling that he was not alone. He paused by the window and caught his reflection in the glass. At first, it was just him, a tired man with deep-set eyes and a furrowed brow. But as he blinked and looked again, a chill raced down his spine. There, peering over his shoulder in the reflection, was the faint outline of another man's face. The features were gaunt, the eyes hollow yet laden with sorrow, as if he were trapped between life and death. Edward spun around, half expecting to find someone standing behind him, but the room was empty. That night, sleep was an elusive guest. Edward lay in bed, replaying the unsettling vision over and over. Who was the man in the window? The image was so vivid, so distinct from his own, that it felt like an intrusion into his very soul. Determined to make sense of the experience, he sat at the small writing desk, a single lamp casting long shadows against the wall, and began scribbling notes in a battered leather journal. He recalled stories he'd heard in passing, the legend of a drowned girl and the mysterious presence of another spirit. The room's atmosphere grew denser with every passing minute, as though the very walls were closing in. At the stroke of midnight, Edward was abruptly awakened by a soft, distant knocking. He rose, hesitated at the door, then slowly stepped out into the darkened corridor. The sound led him to an ancient staircase that spiraled downward into a part of the lodge he had not yet seen. In the gloom of the lower levels, he discovered a dusty archive room filled with old newspapers, ledgers, and personal diaries. It was here that he encountered a worn, leather-bound diary whose brittle pages whispered secrets of decades past. The diary belonged to a man named Jonathan Blackwood, a name that sent a shiver down his spine as he remembered the face in the window. The entry spoke of a love lost, of guilt and mourning, and of a tragedy so profound that it had cursed the lodge for generations. Jonathan's words painted a picture of a proud family whose life was shattered by the drowning of his beloved daughter, Emily. A forbidden romance, scandal, and heartbreak had conspired to bring misfortune to those who dwelled within Brookdale Lodge. Jonathan had documented every haunting moment of that dark chapter, and as Edward read, it became clear that the man he saw in the window was not a figment of his imagination, but the tortured spirit of Jonathan Blackwood himself. Over the next few days, Edward immersed himself in the lore of Brookdale Lodge. In hushed conversations with the aging staff and curious townsfolk, He pieced together the tragic history that had long shrouded the estate. Once a stately manor, Brookdale had been the summer retreat for a prominent family. Emily Blackwood, a bright-eyed and gentle soul, had captured the hearts of everyone with her laughter and kindness. But when a forbidden love affair was exposed, scandal erupted. Jonathan Blackwood, stricken by both grief and a consuming guilt for the role he had played in the turmoil, became a recluse, his mind unraveling in the grip of despair. One stormy evening, long before Edward's arrival, Emily had wandered to the nearby lake, a mirror of darkness reflecting the tortured skies. Overwhelmed by the sorrow of her father's self-condemnation and the weight of her own lost innocence, she stepped into the icy water and never returned. Rumors spread that on moonlit nights, her spirit could be seen drifting along the water's edge, forever seeking the love and forgiveness that had been denied her in life. But even as Emily's ghost was said to haunt the grounds, it was Jonathan's spectral presence that lingered most persistently. His anguished face, eternally caught in the window of room 217, was a reminder of the sins of the past. Edward's rational mind waged war against the notion of supernatural phenomena, yet every time he ventured near that window, his heart pounded in a rhythm that defied reason. During the day, he explored the lodge's corridors and the small, overgrown garden, where ancient statues and broken fountains testified to better days. In one dusty corner of the estate, he found an old photograph depicting Jonathan Blackwood standing solemnly by a lake, his eyes hauntingly similar to the spectral gaze he'd witnessed. With each new discovery, Edward felt the weight of the lodge's tragic history pressing down on him, urging him to resolve the mystery once and for all. Night after night, the experiences grew more intense. Edward's dreams were invaded by visions of a forlorn child calling out from the mist. The spectral presence of Jonathan Blackwood appeared not only in the window, but in the mirror and the dark corners of the room. At times, he heard soft murmurs echoing through the hallways, a voice pleading for release, for redemption. The line between waking and dreaming blurred, and Edward found himself drawn deeper into the lodge's dark embrace. One particularly stormy night, the winds howled as if echoing the sorrow of bygone eras. Edward awoke to a sudden chill and a persistent tapping at the window. He sat up, his eyes straining in the darkness, and there it was again, that pale, anguished face, hovering just beyond the glass. This time, the expression was different, more desperate, almost pleading. Unable to shake the compulsion, Edward stepped closer and whispered, "What do you want from me?" For a long, agonizing moment, silence reigned. Then, as if in answer, the lights flickered and a series of soft, disembodied words echoed in the room. "Forgive me." The voice was not of a man nor a child, but a blend of sorrow that transcended age. Edward's heart pounded, and he felt an irresistible urge to follow the sound. His trembling hands gathered his journal and a small flashlight, and he ventured out into the corridors with a mixture of dread and determination. In the depths of the lodge, Edward discovered an abandoned parlor where the atmosphere was thick with memories. Faded portraits lined the walls, and the lingering scent of old perfume mixed with the mustiness of forgotten time. In one corner, he found an antique phonograph, its needle resting on a vinyl record that played a haunting melody. The sound was melancholic, as if recounting a lifetime of regret. As he listened, Edward realized that the notes told a story, a tale of love, loss, and the desperate yearning for forgiveness. Determined to understand, he returned to the archive room and pored over Jonathan Blackwood's diary. The entries grew more frantic, revealing that Jonathan had come to believe that his spirit was bound to the lodge until he could atone for the sins of the past. His writings spoke of a ritual, a means of releasing his tortured soul, and that of his lost daughter from an eternal purgatory. The ritual required an act of penance at the lake, beneath a blood-red moon. Edward's rational mind recoiled at the idea of supernatural rituals, yet the overwhelming evidence of the lodge's history and the vividness of his encounters left him no choice but to consider that some things defied logic. Edward's days turned into a feverish quest for answers. He scoured local archives and visited the town's small historical society, where yellowed documents and brittle newspaper clippings chronicled the Blackwood tragedy in excruciating detail. A particularly damning article from 1924 recounted how Jonathan Blackwood had been seen wandering the grounds of Brookdale Lodge long after Emily's death, his eyes wild with remorse, and his hands reaching out as if trying to grasp the intangible threads of his shattered past. As dusk fell on his third day at the lodge, Edward felt a growing compulsion to confront the paranormal directly. With the diary clutched in his hand, he returned to room 217. The window, now illuminated by the flickering light of a solitary candle, seemed to beckon him. He could see the spectral figure more clearly now, its features etched with grief, its eyes a mirror of endless regret. It was as if the face in the glass was trying to communicate a silent message, urging him to help break the cycle of sorrow. "Jonathan," Edward called softly, using the name that had come to dominate the diary's pages. "I'm here. I want to help you. Tell me how to set you free." For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the candle flame danced wildly as if caught in a turbulent wind. A whisper slithered through the darkness. "The lake, forgive, release." The voice was barely audible, yet its urgency was undeniable. Edward's pulse raced. Was it the drowned girl's plea or Jonathan's remorseful cry? The voices seemed to merge into one tragic lament. Unable to ignore the call, Edward resolved to seek out the lake that had become the nexus of these ghostly apparitions. He donned his coat, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out into the cold night. The wind carried the faintest sound of lapping water, guiding him along a narrow path that wound through the dense woods behind the lodge. Shadows danced among the trees, and the moon, shrouded intermittently by heavy clouds, cast eerie silver patterns on the forest floor. At the edge of a clearing, the lake spread out like a vast dark mirror. The water was still, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple that sent shivers through the silence. Edward's heart hammered in his chest as he knelt by the water's edge, the chill of the night seeping into his bones. In the reflection of the lake, he saw not only his own face, but also a ghostly figure standing beside him, the spectral visage of a small girl with sorrowful eyes, reaching out as if for salvation. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The lake, the ghostly girl, and the memory of Jonathan Blackwood's anguished diary merged into one overwhelming tableau of grief and longing. Edward felt tears prick his eyes as he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His voice broke the stillness, and the ghostly figure seemed to waver in acknowledgement. It was in that fragile moment that Edward realized the truth. The curse of Brookdale Lodge was not merely about a single tragedy. It was a tapestry of human frailty, guilt, and the desperate need for forgiveness, a story written in sorrow, blood, and the silent language of ghosts. The following day dawned overcast, the skies heavy with unspoken promises. Edward, though haunted by the spectral images of the previous night, felt an inner resolve strengthening. He returned to the archive room at the lodge to examine Jonathan Blackwood's diary once more. Hidden between the pages was a faded map of the property, marked with cryptic symbols and annotated with instructions for the ritual. The passage described a moonlit ceremony to be performed at the lake, a symbolic act of contrition that might release the tormented spirits bound to Brookdale Lodge. The diary's final entry, written in a trembling hand, read, "I am doomed to wander until my sins are absolved. Only the pure act of remorse, offered beneath the blood-red moon at the lake, can bring the long-awaited peace. If any soul with a compassionate heart dares to perform this rite, may the dead find solace and the living be spared this relentless torment." Edward's mind whirled with possibilities. He had never been a man prone to superstition, yet here was an undeniable plea from a tortured soul spanning generations. That evening, as dusk gave way to night, he prepared himself for the ritual. With the diary, a small vial of water collected from the lake, taken earlier in a moment of quiet desperation, and a single white candle, he retraced his steps through the forest to the lakeshore. Under a sky streaked with the red hues of an impending blood moon, Edward found himself alone with the restless spirits. The wind whispered through the trees, and the water shimmered with an almost otherworldly luminescence. He knelt at the water's edge, opened the diary once more, and recited the words written by Jonathan Blackwood. "I offer my heart in contrition. May forgiveness wash over these haunted souls," he intoned, his voice quavering with both fear and resolve. The moment his words faded into the night, the surface of the lake began to churn. A gentle glow emerged from its depths, and the air filled with a soft, mournful melody. Edward's eyes widened as he saw, in the water, the spectral forms of both Jonathan and the young girl. Their expressions, though etched with sorrow, softened into something akin to relief. In that ethereal glow, the ghost reached out one trembling hand toward him, the other a silent plea for peace. For several agonizing minutes, Edward remained there, transfixed by the spectral tableau before him. The voices grew louder now, a chorus of remorse and longing that echoed across the water. "Forgive, forgive," they murmured in unison, a timeless refrain that resonated deep within him. He understood then that the ritual was not just an act of redemption for the ghosts, it was a bridge between past and present, a testament to the power of empathy and the possibility of healing even the most enduring wounds. Summoning every ounce of courage, Edward dipped his fingers into the cold water and let it run over his hands, symbolically offering himself as a willing conduit for forgiveness. The surface of the lake shimmered as if in approval, and slowly, the spectral figures began to fade. The anguished faces softened into expressions of quiet resignation before disappearing altogether, leaving behind only the gentle ripples on the water's surface. In that poignant silence, Edward felt an indescribable lightness, a burden lifted from his soul. The oppressive presence that had haunted room 217, the sorrowful eyes in the window, and the ghostly whispers in the corridors all seemed to dissipate into the cool night air. The curse of Brookdale Lodge, it seemed, had finally been broken, if only for a fleeting moment of peace. In the days that followed, Brookdale Lodge took on a different aura. The oppressive gloom that had long permeated its halls appeared to have lessened. The staff, once guarded and furtive in their expressions, now exchanged tentative smiles, as if aware that the heavy legacy of the past had been, in some small way, atoned for. Edward, too, felt transformed by his experience. His skeptical mind had been forced to confront the mysteries of life and death, and in doing so he discovered a wellspring of compassion and empathy he never knew he possessed. Before leaving the town, Edward returned to the archive room one final time. He carefully placed Jonathan Blackwood's diary back among the old records, as if entrusting the story of Brookdale Lodge to the annals of history. In its pages lay not only a chronicle of tragedy, but also a message of redemption, a reminder that even the most haunted souls could find solace, if only someone dared to listen. As he drove away from the lodge on that chilly morning, Edward looked back at the imposing silhouette of the building. For a moment, in the rearview mirror, he thought he saw a faint, almost imperceptible figure standing in one of the upper windows, a gentle, knowing smile etched upon its spectral face. Whether it was the spirit of Jonathan Blackwood finally at peace, or a lingering echo of the past, Edward could not be sure. All he knew was that the man in the window had been both a harbinger of sorrow and a beacon of hope, a reminder that forgiveness and empathy could mend even the deepest of wounds. In the quiet solitude of his journey onward, Edward carried with him the memory of Brookdale Lodge, a place where the past and present had converged, in a tapestry of heartbreak and redemption. The legend of the drowned girl and the haunted man in the window would live on in whispers and recollections, a tale to be told to those who sought to understand the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil of the ordinary. And somewhere, in the shifting shadows of that ancient estate, a spirit had finally found rest.